Good evening, Kaiju fans. Welcome back. Oh boy, it's a good day to be in America. I gotta start my morning with the Supreme Court announcement, and I am feeling lovely. I'm having an excellent day, and I thought, what better way to commemorate this important occasion than to acknowledge the biggest queen in all of Kaiju fandom, the mother of the earth herself, Mothra. The purveyor of justice, Mothra, is here. And so tonight we will be diving into the original 1961 Mothra. And the good news here is that we've got all our team back. We have Honda back. We have Suraya. Um, I love this movie. This is such a fun movie. Um, little problematic at times. It's not a perfect kaiju film by any means, but it is a good one, and it is a very influential one. It is a very important film in the Toho canon. So grab a drink. It's time for the Kaijuologist to ramble for about 20 minutes. Who am I kidding? I'm going to spend 45 minutes on the Mothra prop alone. You all know it. Now, this film very much a solo adventure. So we have two factors here that matter more than they might in other kaiju films. One is the human element. We need engaging, good human action here, otherwise, we're going to be bored to tears waiting for the monster to show up. The second one is the personality and the character of the monster themselves. We need a monster that is engaging and not just an obvious puppet crashing through buildings. And this is why this is an excellent example of solo adventure. Both of these elements are very strong in this film. So much so that when I first found a VHS of this, actually, here I can bring up the one I found. I think I was like 8 or 9 when I found this VHS, and it really rocked my world. It blew my mind. I didn't know about the Rebirth of Mothra series. All I knew at this point really was the Showa Mothra, Godzilla or Mothra versus Godzilla the '64. I'd seen her in Destroy All Monsters. I'd seen her in Ebra Horror of the Deep. And so to find out there was a movie before all of it and it's just Mothra, it was very exciting, but it also kind of confused me. I didn't understand how Mothra could hold a film of her own. And that is kind of one of the problems of the film, is that the monster action can get repetitive at times. There's only so much you can do with these props, and this is Toho's first crack at this monster. Almost every attempt at Mothra in the '60s is more sophisticated. Um, but still, it's not bad. And the thing that, as a little kid, when I was watching this, I binged this for like 2 weeks. And the thing that kept me coming back was how unique some of the monster sequences were, but also how much you enjoy the human element. The human characters here are very fun. This is, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is a very important moment for Toho. We have moved out of the gritty darkness that the series kind of started with in the '50s. This does not feel anything like Gojira, not Rodan, even Varan. This is more fanciful, fantastic. There's a heavy element of fantasy here. The sci-fi is still there. I mean, we've got telepathy. We've got an island that's been nuked. Um, and I've read a few times that people think this isn't a very political film. And yes, the politics aren't as overt as you get with Gojira, but I think it's actually way more political than Ishiro Honda has been for a while. And this film is so influential. The blueprint that Shinichi Sekizawa sets up in his screenplay, this becomes pretty standard. This influences very much King Kong versus Godzilla. He perfects a lot of it with Mothra versus Godzilla. And even into Ghidra the Three-Headed Monster, we're still riffing off of the idea of this island and the inhabitants and Mothra as this deity. This is a big film for Toho. I suppose we should just get right to the human element here. This is a great, this is a strong cast. Not all the characters are as fleshed out as you would want, but none of them just absolutely suck. None of them are just background noise. So we have Frankie Sakai, who plays Zenichiro. He goes by Zenchan most of the film. He's kind of our protagonist journalist here. We have Kyoko Kagawa. She plays Michi Hanamura. She's the female photographer. Hiroshi Kuzumi. He plays Dr. Shinichi Chujo. Unfortunately, we did recently lose this actor. He passed away, I think maybe a month ago now, but there were a lot of lovely tributes to him up on Facebook and some of the other fan sites. Ken Yuhara plays Dr. Harada. And then we have Jerry Ito, who plays Clark Nelson. Oh, let's get to that in a moment here. The pop duo The Peanuts, Yumi Ito, Emi Ito, play the Little Beauties, or the Shobijin, as I think it's pronounced. Anyway, very interesting to have a prominent comedian in the lead protagonistic role here, and to the benefit of the film. He's not just goofy. When he wants to be serious, he can be serious. He can pull the Jack Black maneuver on you. But his physical comedy is excellent. It's entertaining to this day. He has that meticulous timing of a Three Stooges skit that you can't help but be amused. Even when it's a cheap joke, you can't help but be amused. The cast of characters, and this is the first time really that we do the journalist angle here, and it feels almost like a stereotype, a cliche, because of how many times it gets done throughout the next 40-50 years. But this is really the first time they focus in on journalists being our main protagonist here. And Ishiro Honda does poke at times the idea of journalistic integrity, I suppose, here, and both sides of the coin. He gives us the female photographer who sneaks shots with her fake camera at times. She says she's put her camera away, and a few times she's like, nope, got a secret one. So he acknowledges the slyness. But then with Zenchan, we have moments where he could be the journalist of the century. He could break a huge story about the many fairies off on Infant Island, and he chooses not to, out of respect for their culture and to keep them protected. And so that's a fun little discussion here. The Doctor character, he's good at stapling together plot points. He does admittedly feel like he's just a practical character. He's what we needed, what the script needed, not so much someone with a lot of, I suppose, drive or as much emotional connection as some of the other characters at times have. I will say I don't mind this female photographer. Some people have complained she feels unfleshed out background noise, which is fair, but she has little moments of being clever in her own right, of being a little manipulative too. When she finds out there's a media blackout on the expedition to the island, you can see the actress is clearly poking Zenchan, like, no one gets to go. How are we going to get a story? What are you going to do about it? And she teases the idea right out to him of like, you're going to sneak on that ship, right? You're going to get us our story, right? So I don't see her as a completely underwritten, useless female archetype. I think she does have her own little moments of swagger. The script just doesn't dwell on it the way Honda does with some of his later female characters. We do have, I don't think I named him off, we do have the little boy in this. And actually, as far as little kid actors go in kaiju films, he is very much a blessing. He doesn't talk a lot. He is not a huge part of the plot. And when he is part of the plot, he's actually very sympathetic. the way he wants to go in and steal the fairies. He recognizes corruption right in front of him, and the rest of the adult characters are like, "Oh, the law, ooh, bureaucracy," and he's like, "No, I'm going in there and stealing them." And you can't help but kind of love that about him. He's the underdog. He's an underdog character. He's in some ways. I've talked about the Honda mirror. That a lot of times he has characters that seem in their tactics or their motives to mirror the monster. He might be the mirror for Mothra here. Kind of this underdog who is just driven as heck, is going to get his way into anything. By the end of the film, we realize Mothra is pretty powerful and we're pretty terrified of her. But initially, when she's just a caterpillar, they think, oh, caterpillar, it's not that big of a deal. And then when she's in the cocoon and they burn her alive, the whole time, I feel like there is a little bit of a understated element here that she's not that much of a threat. We'll be okay. So the other character to hit off here is poor Jerry Ito, who in the English dub, his name is spelt Jelly Ito. Yup. English at its best here. It kills me. I love it. Like, Jerry. It's about as Anglo of a name as you're gonna get, and they couldn't get it right. The poor man. He's a good villain. He does his job well here. Maybe a little over the top at times. I mean, there is no question right off the bat who's the villain. He is scowling the whole freaking movie, and even when he's smiling, it's like he knows some dirty, terrible secret. He's an appropriate bastard, and that's okay. So I guess to move into the monster element here, this is the introduction of Mothra. This is another reason that this film is a very important part of kaiju history here. I mean, really, when you talk about kaiju, it's kind of the big four here, right? Like you've got King Kong, you've got Godzilla, you've got Gamera, and then you've got Mothra. She's the only other character who has held down solo adventures. She got her own trilogy in the 90s. She is a commodity, she is a name, and something about this film went very, very right for Toho. That was actually one of the things I was researching, because I was curious why, after they have King Kong versus Godzilla, right, like, very obvious matchup, why the next one was Mothra as opposed to Rodan. And Mothra was a financial success. Looking up the numbers, I was expecting it to blow it out of the ballpark. But I think this film was just, I think it played to kids and adults better than Rodan or Varan did. It's colorful, it's a little more fantasy adventure. Another interesting point, too, is that the Tokyo Tower that the Mothra larva crawls up and obliterates, making her cocoon, was a pretty new structure at this time. It had only been around, I believe it's built around 58. Someone correct me if you know. So at this point, it's 3 years old. And to have the monster crawling up and destroy it, I think a more iconic image, perhaps, than anything the other monster films had grasped since Gojira. I think almost a King Kong on the Empire State Building moment. But unique, too. She's a female monster. And it's fun in this movie seeing her. Well, she's not the villain. That's the thing about it. She's not the villain. She's just trying to rescue her fairies. But she is feared, and she is destructive. You get a lot of sequences with the larva just plowing through buildings. And then the adult form, interestingly enough, this was a huge monster, size-wise, anatomically. They actually scaled down the size of her wings for Mothra versus Godzilla, because the way they set her up, she would have dwarfed Godzilla, actually. She would have been way larger than him with her wingspan. And, I mean, it's just fun. You don't see Mothra. She becomes the good guy of every movie. Her whole trilogy is her being the Jesus Christ character. It's fun to see her kind of be an element of terror and really, really just blatantly destructive. I mean, there's a few lines where they're listing off casualties, and it's like thousands dead in Newkirk City. This is unfortunately though one of the hard parts of this film. I think the larva form tends to hold up a lot better. This again was something I never considered. How is Mothra destructive? I like she crawls up buildings, she spins too much web, and there's web everywhere on the city. I do like, especially and the military attacks, and when she's plowing through the ships on the ocean. There are some good effects there. There are some really good moments. The biggest problem in this film, I think, falls on to the models. The model work here is very hit or miss. There's a few really good shots. There's a few like excellent shots, and then there's just moments where even the way the building crumbles. There's like one shot where you should see windows falling apart, and instead you can see like the fabric and like materials they used to make it look like there was depth inside of the building just falling out. I don't know if it was rush, budget cuts, what it was here. Very interesting. Um, the adult form is rougher though. Again, there's a few okay shots, but they really, especially when you see her into 1964, you realize how problematic this was. She looks just kind of awkward, like gangly in the wrong ways, a little too fuzzy at times. And then her model work, especially into Newkirk City, is especially noticeable. I mean, the shots of the cars flying and flipping around, the imagery they went for is very ambitious, but it didn't appear that they had the time or the energy for it. Um, and I might be sensitive to this right now, especially because the reason I'm reviewing this film was I found on YouTube. It's on sale for YouTube. It's like $7, and they had it in high definition. And a lot of the scenes actually look really fantastic, especially the jungle set that the expedition's going through. Wow, some beautiful stuff there. But then when you get to some of the monster scenes, I think the high definition reveals. Mm, it's especially disappointing too, because if you've been watching my reviews, I think Rodan is incredibly impressive in what it pulls off with its special effects. And here again, we have a flying monster, hurricane winds, sends debris flying. How well they pulled it off in Rodan, which is 6 years ago now, and it's bizarre to me. It seems like this really should have been better. Um, that said, so the character of Mothra here, it's there. She's the indomitable spirit. She is a little bit of an underdog in her larva form, but by the time she's full Mothra, full butterfly, she's not. She's not the underdog now. She is the harbinger of utter death to everyone around her. Okay, so probably now, try and segue this into some of the politics, the philosophy, some of the interesting things our director Ishiro Honda is working with here. I said at the top, I think this is a more political film than people actually give it credit for, especially within the context of where Japan is. Uh, we're what about 15 years out from the war, but that I think that still looms very heavy in this film for a number of reasons. I think, well, I mean, let's talk about Realistica. As you guys know, next summer I'm going to be going on a trip to Realistica. I want to see Newkirk City, and then I'm going to Seradia. Imaginary assistant, you booked my flight, right? Oh, you didn't. So you didn't do your job, is what I'm hearing. Hold up, I gotta cut a bitch. So most people have come to the conclusion that Rolisica, a combination of Russia and America, Newkirk City, what was it? I think New York and Kiev. It makes sense, and it's a commentary on the impending. It's still a Cold War right now, but any moment it could be the war, and it's all about the race to nuclear arms, which is obviously something Japan very sensitive to. I think Mothra is in so many ways a symbol for war in this film. because of the greed and the corruption that Nelson has brought. And interestingly enough, the fact that the Rolusican government initially sides with Nelson and says he gets to keep his berries. He showed up on that island, kidnapped these clearly human, sentient human beings, is using them as slave entertainment, and massacred half the natives with guns. No, he deserves it. Yeah, we side with him. And then Mothra shows up and starts killing innocent people and wrecking everything. And then the Releasican government is like, ooh, maybe we didn't want this so much. Bad, bad. I think it's kind of a cultural reflection for Honda, uh, that by the time World War II had ended, a lot of people in Japan, we tend to paint them as they were going to fight till the very end. Yes, some of them, some of the nationalists, but there were a lot of people in Japan suffering very, very badly at the hands of this military complex that had really taken over everything. The military did not show sympathy to its own people. People were starving. If you've seen, I think I've got a picture of this too. Not seen. If you've read the graphic novel Barefoot Gen, it paints a very different image of what life in Japan during World War II was like. And I think if we understood, if everyone in America understood this, we would look back at our own history and cringe a little bit at what we did to essentially an island of starving farmers and fishermen. That said, though, it's the corruption that bled into the Japanese government, into the Japanese military, the thirst for power, the thirst for, power. And I think that's what Honda's principally warning with the character of Nelson and the fact that the government isn't sure if they're supporting or backing Nelson. When you disrespect another person's culture, when you treat other people poorly, I mean, as the Japanese were, they committed some atrocities of their own. You invite the specter of war. You invite a violence. You invite a monster upon your door. And that's an interesting thing too, actually. I'm not sure I agree with this, but I've read a few essays about people within the Japanese community who think they actually did deserve the bombs, that they asked for the bombs on themselves because they didn't stand up to their government and the military leaders and say, what you're doing isn't right. It's not right. We, as a culture, as a people, should have been stronger to recognize this corruption. And so I think it's very much Ishiro Honda sending the direct warning to America and Russia saying, you guys keep going down this path. You will invite the monster to your door and it will kill the innocent, it will kill the evil, it will kill everything. There will not be a reckoning here. So it also struck me very interesting too. I never thought about this as a little kid, but this time watching it, you rarely see a Toho film where it's a city of Caucasian people being attacked, and yet Newkirk City is a large cast all of a sudden of white people. I think again, right back to Honda referencing the two warring bodies in the world right now and the consequences of it. I mean, maybe there's more to it, maybe there's not, but it struck me very interesting this time that I'm like, you just don't see that in a Toho film. You really, even when Godzilla attacks New York and destroy all monsters, you don't see white people running and hiding the way the Japanese actors have gotten so accustomed to. I'll also point out here, I have yet to actually dig up my own copy of the Japanese version. So, done my research. As I understand it, the Japanese version, I think it's about 9 minutes longer. And it deals with specifically religious differences. It goes into that more than this one does. And that is one of the awkward things with the English cut, is at the end of the film is suddenly very overt in its religious imagery. The image for Mothra that our doctor discovers right off the bat is it's a cross and it's got like a shiny sun thing behind it. And then he's downtown Newkirk City trying to figure out how do we Honen Mothra, and he looks up and he sees a church and he sees the cross. Again, he sees a very Western church here. It's imagery. It's just strikes me interesting that at this time period, that's just not something you really see Toho kaiju films talking about as Western Christianity, and yet so we have the cross. They paint the giant cross on the airway strip, and then the church bells, which they say sounds like the fairies singing. It sounds similar to them and their voices. I mentioned a bit in my Mothra versus Godzilla review that Honda has a very strong message of the brotherhood of man, that no culture is truly separate, that what we do to each other affects us eventually. You don't get to just live your own life. You have to respect other people. And I think that's kind of what some of this is that discussion of whatever you perceive God to be, it's largely all going to be the same thing at the end of the day. That there's not that much space between these cultures. We label it something different. We identify it maybe a little differently. But at the end of the day, this idea of God is pretty similar and universal, and has been for centuries and centuries. And Mothra being the god of Infant Island and their culture, it's interesting that she responds to church bells and the Christian cross symbol. Yeah, I'm not exactly positive where they wanted this message to land or how, but my best guess is that motif of the brotherhood of man. I suppose the last point I'll make, and we did tiptoe into this actually with Varan, who, you know, being a deity figure, and the natives and the culture wanting you to respect their deity. This motif of the islanders and the way we treat the islanders and respond to the islanders, and oh boy, Toho really loves to knock it out of the park with blackface at this period. I mean, you can just see the makeup slathered on these actors. It is not subtle, and yeah, sign of the times. But it's something that he tackles frequently after this film in particular, and it's also a very unique point in the Japanese culture. The Japanese culture and the way they respond to their indigenous people, I suppose, is not pretty. It is not pretty. Even to this day, people will actually do like blood tests to make sure you don't have blood of these certain people before I marry you. It's a very ugly little racist current that I don't know, I hope has gotten better, but I'm not sure has actually. And I think it's something Honda started to get pretty bold-faced actually, in the way that his stories have these narratives. I mean, this movie, the next two, have these narratives about, you know, rich yuppie businessmen and reporters, and they go to the island and they make judgments, and then the native people strike back, and oftentimes the native people are actually a lot more generous. They're actually a lot more forgiving and friendly, and I think it's kind of a cultural divide within Japan that Honda is trying to tackle here, that we can't treat people this way. This is, again, this is the corruption. This is the dark part of human culture, of humanity, that when we tempt and when we poke the stick at, we get the monster. You don't want the monster. And it boils down to that message. We're right back to Mary Shelley now, that the real monster never was Frankenstein's monster. It was Frankenstein and the culture around him. You know, one of the interesting things about this too is how different some of Honda's directing is here. Specifically, the weird, like, stories within stories, like just little scenes that suddenly there's a quick little story told within a scene. An example being when we're first trying to interview the doctor, and we have this whole physical bit, and he's got the newspaper up. He doesn't want a photo, and they get him to put the newspaper down, and she sneaks a photo with her fake camera. Right. So this scene is really about us introducing the Doctor and having that discussion about going into the expedition, yada yada. But we have this brief little story about the newspaper, and then later in this scene we have the mouse. We have the little kid, and he's coming to catch his mouse, and Zenchan catches the mouse and gets it stuck in his shirt. And he does this a few times throughout the film where the point of the scene, what the scene is actually doing, is something very different than all the little physical stories Ishiro Honda's telling. It's kind of charming. It's part of what makes it entertaining. But if you look back at what Honda was doing with his earlier work, the scene is about what it is about. There are no distractions, there's no divergence here. He's very focused. In this film, he kind of cuts loose. He has a little fun. And I think it's part of what adds to the charm of this film. Okay, we'll see after I edit this how succinct I actually was this time. Anyway, I appreciate the support. I appreciate you for tuning in. As I said, Mothra, she's the purveyor of justice. She bridges cultures, and I think it was a good day. It was a good day to celebrate Mothra. Well, and if you've seen the Godzilla vs. Mothra from 1992, you know Mothra could fit right in a gay pride parade. She could be the float. Anyway, thank you for hanging out. Let's check out and celebrate the rest of this night. I am the Kaijuologist. I'm signing off from Denver, Colorado. We're the Mile High City. Oh, we're getting higher all the time. Hey Kaiju fans, you indulge me this long. Give me just like 2 more minutes. I debated if I was going to include this. I thought it was kind of a bad idea because I want the channel to be more specific and focused. But this channel is also my opportunity to be me. As a performer, as an actor, so much of my life is me escaping myself. It's artifice. It's about entertainment. It's about the audience. And this channel is like the one venue I get to be me a lot of the times. I mean, I'm an openly gay person, and yet the thing I don't want to tell people is how much time I spend watching Godzilla movies. But I thought it was a little serendipitous, a little overwhelming, and something I couldn't ignore. And I thought I'd also look back on this and be like, Christian, you coward, if I didn't try this moment. So it's like 1:30 in the morning. Finished filming the review a few hours ago, finished editing. It was rendering, and while it was rendering, I found a link to Barack Obama's eulogy he gave today for, I believe, Reverend Pickney, one of the victims in the Charleston shooting. And then I watched the rendering of the edit, and it struck me how so many of the things I was just lackadaisically running through. It was just, picking my brain, trying to talk, trying to slap this thing together. How many of the elements are so real and potent and important right now. I'm not sure why the review happened today. I saw the movie like 2 weeks ago. I've been doing notes. It could have happened a week ago. It could have happened a month from today, but today I suddenly was inspired and said, let's do this. And, I had the cute, I could tie it into gay marriage. But, um, yeah, the realization that in a very like short span of a week in our country, we've had to deal with that massacre in Charleston, and we watched the families forgive the murderer. We had a discussion. We were having a discussion, a very powerful, real discussion about removing the symbols of what was hatred. I know some people have interpretations, but those interpretations can't trump what the Confederacy was. So sorry. And then here it is. Here it is, June 26th, and a week out from one minority being attacked, we just took a huge step towards acknowledging the humanity of another minority in our country. Um, this is a kaiju film review channel. The bigger point here being that this is all in these films. When I'm embarrassed about admitting to people how much I love these films, when you feel embarrassed when our kaiju family comes together, we don't we shouldn't feel demeaned. Everything I was talking about tonight and joking and being cute about is so painfully real and relevant for so many people in this country and this world. And that's the heartbeat of these series. From the things I learned from a Japanese film series have made me a better American and a better person. Um, the way Barack Obama, whether you like the man or not, I encourage you to listen to this eulogy because it was beautiful. It was a really beautiful, important eulogy. Um, and I've never been a church person, but you know, these films we watch and we make fun of and we have a good time with. As a little kid, they were fantastic and cool to me, and as I got older, the potency and the relevancy of them and their meanings became more powerful. And then here I am, 26, pursuing entertainment largely because of these films, because of the storytelling they inspired, um, and the philosophy and the power behind them means even more. You can draw your strength from anywhere, and as long as that strength is telling you to treat other human beings as equals, there is no shame in that. So no kaiju shame. Thanks for sticking it out.